Hello again, and welcome back to Nonprofits. You know the old adage, God will help those that help themselves. I think the Mennonite community in rural Texas missed that memo. With RFK Jr. now in charge of the Department of Health, measles on the rise along with other supposedly eliminated diseases. Here, a belief ruling over reason and a lack of trust in established institutions, we are now on the precipice of some serious health crises in the United States, especially in isolated communities where there's a serious lack of education and outreach to the wider impact of health access. We see how faith alone can lead to deaths that can be avoided with one simple shot. This story is from AP News by Devi Shastri on March 4th, 2025. Okay, my friend Eli, I got questions for you. So for my first question, you mentioned family decision-making over well-being. So I wanted to know your thoughts on families making decisions for their children, for example, that is going to cause harm. And where is that line between parental right versus, because based like on our previous story from Monday, how do we decide, where that line is when we're talking especially about parents being able to give like vaccines or not choosing not to give vaccines to their kids?
Well, I think that we have this idea, we insist that no one has the right to tell my family how to live, tell me and my family how to live, which I generally agree with. But I think what happens is you have decision makers in these families that believe they are making decisions in the best interest of their family. And that belief that they are matters a little bit. But what's happening in reality is like most people just kind of like once they stop being required to learn, they don't anymore. So you're not like taking in new information and learning about like, hey, this is how vaccines really help, or this is what medical research says about this particular thing, or this is why measles is worse than what'll happen if what might happen if I do vaccinate, right? So, and I think that's the problem too, is that people tend to look at information in a vacuum. And so if you see that, there have been this many injuries from vaccines as a result of this or that vaccine, and you don't compare that to what's going to happen if you don't vaccinate, that's like me saying, if I say every autopsy we've ever done in history has revealed some amount of dihydrogen monoxide in the cadaver at the time of death. If you don't already have the context that dihydrogen monoxide is just water and it's vital for life as we know it, then that makes it sound like that's somehow related to this high rate of mortality. But it's just a thing that happens to coexist or like happen to be there. And not having it is much, much worse than having it. But when you just look at that information without its context, you're going to scare yourself away from things that are more likely to help you than hurt you.
No, I think that's a really good point. And Kelly, you mentioned RFK Jr.'s, lack of vaccine education and Clausen, was like, oh, well, he knows what he's talking about. So I obviously have
I saw that. I saw the quote in the article from senior pastor Clausen. Do I trust all vaccines? No. And I get from Kennedy that he doesn't trust all the vaccines either. And he is very well educated in that. I'm not. So, I mean, he's trusting Kennedy's education in vaccines. So I started thinking, I don't think Kennedy ever had any education in that. And I actually did a little bit of research around, just dove down the RFK rabbit hole. And it turns out, well, first off, he was quite the little juvenile delinquent. He was even in a gang called the Hyannisport Terrors, which to me is fucking hysterical. I'm not making this up either. Like, a lot of his family members said that he was addicted to drugs, and he led other family members down the path of drug addiction. And honestly, besides the comical gang thing, he sounds like the people I was hanging out with at that age, I'll tell you the truth. He did a ton of work on for environmentalism, legal work, but no vaccine background in any of that. He took a lot of corporations to court for pollution, which again, good for him, seriously. no vaccine education and any of that. The first activism I ever did when I was a kid was for environmentalism. So I'm behind all the stuff he did when he was younger, totally. But again, no vaccine education. He's got an outstanding resume, but nowhere is there any training on vaccine, on healthcare, nothing. So this senior pastor is not trusting vaccines that have been tested and trusting a man who has not been tested.
No, and I agree with you. So, Tracy, I have a question for you. Okay, so and for example, in like Mennonite, Amish communities, these isolated communities, they may not have the same access to health education as like the general public. So we understand that there is a lot of religious privilege going on right now. Where do you think, you mentioned like demonstrable harm in your notes, and where is that line? Like, where is your kind of feeling about like lack of education versus the health of vulnerable populations like children?
Well, Hannah, I called you Hannah. Helen, I'm just not going to accept the lack of education as an excuse. Even the most poorly educated person can understand that when your child stops moving and responding to you and starts to smell a little funny, that means that they died. And when you look at all the kids in your community and you say, well, they're dying a lot. And then you look at another community and you say, oh my goodness, the children aren't dying as much. I wonder why. There's no amount of removal from education from our technology that is going to excuse this negligent behavior. There's no amount whatsoever. If your child is dying, unless you want that to keep happening, you take steps to fix that. I don't really understand. I can't understand not wanting to keep your child from dying.
That's not what it is. It's I don't want my child. The problem is misinformation, not being well informed, but being well misinformed. So you have all these parents who are saying, oh, I had the measles when I was a kid and I lived, but if I give my kid a measles shot, they're going to be autistic, and I don't want my child to be autistic. And that's where this fear comes out of. Now, of course, nobody's going to become on the spectrum just because they got a measles vaccination. It's just not fucking happening. But there's so much misinformation out there teaching people this. I went through it with my kids. My ex-wife brought it up, and we actually did some research. Thank goodness I know how to research stuff, and we found out all this bullshit wasn't true, and my kids are both fully vaccinated. But there is so much misinformation out there that it's easy to be led down the wrong path with it. So I'm sorry, I'm off my soapbox now. There you go.
No. So Eli, like your kid is on the younger end. Like when my kids, like back in the early 2000s, when like the chickenpox vaccine came out, my doctor was like, "Hey, we have the chickenpox vaccine. Do you want your kids to have it?" And I was like, "Yes." I didn't even question it because I had trusted in vaccines. With your fully engrossed in the internet age where misinformation happens all the time, did you struggle with those certain decisions when it came to vaccination, or you were just like, or did you have, what sort of education did you have that you could sort through the bullshit to really understand, what's going to impact your child?
Yeah, well, I was fortunate enough to already be somewhat reasonable by the time my son was born. So I didn't, I was already on the side of like, okay, like vaccines are not a bad thing. I was in EMT school when we found out we were expecting. So I was learning medicine. I was kind of like learning how to like think critically and how like evidence is gathered. And that was really sort of my first introduction into like data gathering type process. The teacher I had was fantastic. But So when it came to like me, when it comes to like, you know, medical decisions for my son, I talked to his pediatrician who has all of his medical history, who has all of the knowledge and the education and the experience to look at the situation and evaluate him. And I can say, what do you recommend? And that pediatrician can say, I recommend this. And I'll say, okay. And as long as like it's not obviously the wrong thing, like who am I to suggest that I know better than a pediatrician that's twice my age? Probably, I don't think they're that old, but
a very big brain.
Say again.
There's nothing wrong with being twice
they have
your
a very
age,
big
Eli.
brain.
Right. No, yeah, and there's nothing wrong with being twice my age, but the fact that like they have the experience in their field to understand. Like, did I learn a little bit at one point? Yeah. Could I have had a conversation about like pediatric emergency medicine with that doctor at some point? Yeah, maybe. Did I ever know more about them than pediatric medicine? 0% is that likely. I think that's 0% likely that ever was the case. So yeah, I just trust what the professional, the experts say. Unless it's glaringly wrong.
So do I. Weird. I know.
No.
So Kelly,
that's not to say. I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
No, keep going. No, keep going. It's fine.
Well, that's not to say. That's not to say experts can't be wrong. Like, it's not intended to be an argument from authority. Like, they can be wrong, and if you feel like something's not right, yeah, of course, check it. But like when the expert is saying like, hey, like the chance of injury is relatively low, and then like Kevin on YouTube is like, no, this is exactly what's going to happen, and I know it because I read about it on Facebook. Like, the doctor is a better source than Kevin.
Wait, what did Kevin? Kevin? It was Kevin?
It was Kevin.
It was Kevin.
It was Kevin.
Yeah.
So, Kelly, as the elder here, do you think that, like, you know, because people haven't lived through, you know, children dying of measles or being infected by polio, for example, because those diseases have been eradicated for so, you know, especially like through when you were growing up and when I grew up, you know, when those diseases haven't been a thing, like, do you think that it is because like people aren't actually seeing these really extreme deficits of health to their children that is keeping them from understanding what it is, or do you think it's like something else?
I think that's part of it. Sure. I mean, that's definitely part of it. I had measles when I was a kid. I had chicken pox. I lived through all that stuff, and none of my kids did. None of my nieces or nephews did. So I see that as a reasonable excuse for why some parents don't do it. And a lot of, now I'm older, but a lot of parents today, they didn't see any of that when they were kids either. So they don't really understand that, you know, when the whole school got measles, one or two of the kids died from it, you know, that they just don't get it. So I think that is definitely a part of it. I think what I was saying before was a part of it too. I don't care about the whole thing. I just care about my child and what could happen to them. So there's kind of a bit of selfishness involved in it too. And then we get also a lot of misinformation being put out there about how it's against a good follower of Jesus would never have something like this stuck into their body, you know, so that's not helping either. There's a whole bunch of different factors, but that's definitely one of them. It's definitely one of them.
And I think that feeds into the ignorance a lot, but like, you know, this particular article mentioned like the Mennonite community, which is, you know, that, and they're kind of a weird community because they're in between. They're not quite Amish where they're completely isolated from, you know, a lot of society, even though they're constantly being influenced by it. Like the Mennonites kind of like, you know, toe the line between the two. You know, so they're exposed to certain levels of, you know, secular life. They're exposed to certain levels of education. So I have to wonder again, also too, because they are part of these religious sects, how much information are they getting, and do they know how to vet? And I guess that they don't. So, Tracy. Hi again. What is your kind of feeling with when it comes to medical expertise and where they're getting their information from? And should secular society be moving into these isolated communities to help educate them better, even though their religious, beliefs don't really want them to?
So an important thing to understand about these religious sects, I know quite a few Amish families, and I've looked into the Amish quite a bit. I haven't really looked into the Mennonites, but this is my understanding. Whatever medical advice that they're given is then relayed to their elder, and then the elder tells them what it is that they're going to do. That's not a vetting process. That's the elder checking with their tradition and their religious thoughts and interpretations. It's not a vetting process at all. They don't have one. They don't research these things. They just sit at a surface level, and whatever. And Kelly's right. There may be some misinformation that's been spread in there as well, and they're not interested in debunking that information or looking deeper into it. They are only interested in their tradition. And I do think that we kind of owe the children, and I'm going to go off on this later about appealing to children, but I think there's a demonstrable harm here. There's 5 things that are needs, that are absolute needs, that you will die if you do not have one of these things, as far as I'm aware. And I could definitely be wrong. But they're food, water, shelter, medicine, and I had another one and I wrote it down. Food, water, shelter, medicine, air.
Air.
And they are depriving the children of one of those 5 things. This is, where's the line at which we're saying it's no longer a personal choice when you're depriving somebody of one of the things they absolutely need in order to continue living? I do think we need to do something. I don't know what it is, but I think something needs to be done.
Well, and it kind of ties back to what we were talking to before about, even when we're talking about doctors being able to, pick and choose, who they're going to serve. It ties back into this, with parents also being able to choose what kind of medical care their children receive. We have to be able to find a balance between the two. And I think that the lack of education, the lack of, there's been an erosions, as Eli mentioned, that, he's going to defer to his pediatrician till the moment that his, his spidey sense goes, that doesn't seem right. Let me go do, get more information, maybe get a second opinion, whatever that is. So I'm going to ask, Kelly, do you think it's that lack of skepticism, or so much skepticism that you don't trust anyone except for an elder in your community, or you have so much skepticism that you don't trust anyone except for where you listen to Kevin on Facebook?
Yeah, what's with that Kevin guy? That guy fucking knows everything, doesn't he?
Kevin knows shit, man.
Oh shit, man! I'll tell you. He's got a lot of viewers, a lot of subscribers too, 2.3 million. It's really a tough thing because I totally forgot your question again because I was thinking of something else, and I apologize.
Just go on what you're thinking about. It's fine.
Cool.
You skip my question.
I was thinking about what Tracy was saying earlier about and I'm totally in agreement with him. I don't think you could probably go in there with a truckload of information, and they're not going to believe it because that information doesn't fit what they want to believe, where the misinformation does. Right? I want to believe this misinformation. I don't care if it's misinformation. They don't even care if it's misinformation. They don't know that it's misinformation, because they don't bother to check it out because they lack that skepticism. I tied it back into your question there. See that? Because they lack
Thank you so much for that.
So you're right. I mean, it's just there is a lack of skepticism on that side, and there is an overabundance of skepticism against authority figures. So it's a weird thing, right? You got too much on one side and not enough on the other, and you can't draw the line where the right amount of skepticism is, can you? I mean, it's a really weird. It's like Loki's wager, if you know what that is. If you don't know what Loki's wager is, go look it up. That's all I'm going to say.
So, Eli, you mentioned like the leave it to your mother's things in your notes.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking.
As a mother, my brain went, oh. So, what was your point with that, with the leave it to your mother's thing?
I am glad you're asking, not only for the chance to clarify, but because it actually, what has been spoken, like what has been said, has kind of reminded me of this. There seems to be this idea that mother knows best. It used to be father knows best. Now it's mother knows best. There's some combination of like, once you become a parent, you are imbued with the undeniable knowledge of what the absolute best choice is for your child. And that just isn't true. Right. And I like it, this could be like in the wrong context construed to be like anti-mother, anti-woman. And I don't want it to be taken that way at all. I don't think even myself as a parent, I do not have infallible knowledge about what the best choice is for my son. And that's why I rely on experts like educators and like psychologists, if that were to become necessary, psychiatrists in under the same context, medical professionals, whatever professionals that are in areas in which I have no knowledge, that's who I defer to when I'm seeking knowledge. And I just don't, and it is that improper application of skepticism, because people don't like to have been wrong in the past. So they don't like to admit that maybe one of the choices I made for my child in the past wasn't the best choice. And now if I change my mind, now I have to admit that I didn't make the best choice before, and now I'm a bad parent. No, you're a bad parent if you continue to make the not best choice in light of overwhelming evidence that the choice you're making is not the best choice. That's what makes you a bad parent. Learning from your mistakes and teaching your child to learn from their mistakes and to admit when they got something wrong, that's what makes you a good parent, because that makes your child a acceptable, like tolerable person to be around.
When you're talking, Eli, the rest of us just look like a shelf of bobbleheads.
I would ask the other people in the panel to follow that up, but I don't think anybody could say it better. So if you're interested in more content from us here at the nonprofits, find a video, because there's all types of stuff. So do the thing. And also, I'm going to remind you again to like and subscribe and ring bells, because pray to the algorithm gods. Bye, everybody.
Get in the comments.
Yeah, and comments.
Comments.